Today's WorkBuzz webinar is all about stopping asking the wrong questions and how to make your employee surveys really matter. For those who don't know me already, my name is Dawn Smedley. I'm Head of Culture here at WorkBuzz, and I'm hosting today's webinar with my fabulous colleague, our Director of People Science, Ry.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here. Always love doing these types of things with Dawny.
Yay! Lots of energy we hope to bring to this afternoon session. But a few housekeeping points just to make before we get into it. We will be recording it, so we'll send that across afterwards. You're muted, but we do want to hear from you. We've got chat and Q&A enabled, so whatever your preference is, please keep the questions coming throughout. Ry's really comfortable just stopping mid-flow and answering those questions. And we've got a couple of polls in there too. So what to expect? We're going to start with a brief introduction to WorkBuzz for those who don't know who we are already. And then Ry will be really challenging us to think differently about our employee surveys and listening strategies. This is webinar 2 of a series of 3, and we'll talk more about the last webinar in the series at the end. But most importantly, we'll have lots of time for questions, so keep them coming in. So firstly, an introduction to WorkBuzz. At WorkBuzz, we help organisations build impactful employee listening strategies. We're all about giving everyone a voice, wherever they are, whatever they do. We're super passionate about it. And we've designed our platform to be simple, flexible, and actionable. We know if we keep doing that, then leaders will keep coming back and using it. But it's all about how we empower leaders at all levels to gather insights, to identify those areas for improvement that link to those business outcomes like retention, attraction, and building a culture where every voice matters. We really think we bring the best of both worlds. We're biased, we know, bringing innovative technology, but with a super experienced in-house people science team. A little bit of grey hair in there, I'm sure what Ry won't be saying. But it really is about helping you ask the right questions to develop a strategy around your employee listening, and definitely not just ticking a survey box. So we work with amazing brands, some of them you can see on the screen here, but brands like Five Guys, Premier Foods, LKQ, Leonardo Hotels. And hopefully our passion for this comes across in everything that we talk about today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to our fabulous Ry, who can introduce himself and introduce you to the topic for today's webinar as well. So over to you, Ry.
Thanks, Dawny. I'm distracted now by trying to count how many grey hairs I actually do have. But yes, lovely to be here. I've been doing this now for about 15 years, actually. The occupational psychology piece, people science director, is just a fancy job title, way of saying that I'm an occupational psychologist. So I'm really passionate about the idea that everyone deserves to have a good day at work, no matter where they work and no matter what they do. That'd be lovely, wouldn't it? And organizations tend to try and help their employees get there by doing employee engagement surveys, culture research. And that's really where I've dedicated the last 15 years or so. And I've been doing it for organizations of just a few hundred people within the UK, right up to some of those global enterprise organizations, the likes of Nestle, Five Guys, and so on, some of those wonderful brands that Dawny mentioned as well. And I think kind of over that time, over that kind of 10, 15 years of doing out and out engagement and culture research, the reality is that I've actually seen lots of similarity and sameness as years go on, of just finding ourselves getting into almost a routine of just asking the same questions year on year or quarter on quarter, depending on your survey cadence, and actually having a look at, have the results gone up or have they gone down? And we find ourselves getting into a bit of a routine of looking at data and approaching our surveys in that way. And sometimes, to use the cliche, change is as good as a rest. And so what I would like to talk about today is some opportunities to just change and evolve the survey and how we can think about this in a different way and actually challenge ourselves as practitioners and businesses to and ask ourselves, do we really get what we should out of employee listening? Do we really use employee feedback, get what we need from it to drive true change within our organizations? And the reality is, for lots of HR practitioners, the answer to that is no. They feel like there is something missing from their surveys. And we would love to hear from the people here today as to what challenges that you're facing and what are your own experiences of running surveys within your organization.
That leads us nicely into, just before you go in, actually, we've got a poll that I'm going to run. Bear with me while I do this. And it basically is just asking you that question. So I'm going to launch the poll now. And with your surveys, what's the biggest challenge you face? So there's a few options in here. I'll give you a minute just to think about it, but just share what you feel are the biggest challenges with your surveys at the moment. Hopefully you can see that on your screen. Identifying clear actions, sustaining momentum. Just give it a couple more minutes. Well, not even that, a few more seconds. Building trust. Amazing. Right, let's end that poll and it'll just give us a good sense of where we are. So if I share those results, you can see that the top 3 things coming through are building trust, identifying clear actions, and sustaining momentum. So I'm going to stop sharing because I think, Rai, you can pick up on all of those themes as you go through this today.
Absolutely.
But I'm sharing the results now. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'll let you carry on, Rai. Go for it.
Thanks, Dawney. I think what we're going to cover, I'm confident that what we're going to cover today is going to help us think a little bit more, or certainly understand why we see some of those challenges with our survey, particularly around identifying actions and sustaining that momentum. How do we really avoid surveys going from that once a year or once a quarter, once every few months, ticking the box where we ask people to do a survey, we have a look at what we've said and go, that's interesting, and then kind of move on to the next piece, because that's the crux of it. And where I want to start off with is just starting to think about what it is that's actually important in our organizations that we really need to be measuring around. And the reality is that for all organizations, culture is ultimately the hero or the villain. So culture is what fundamentally leads us as organizations to achieve great things. Where we do achieve great things, it's also the thing that can help us stay out of trouble. Now, whether that's out of trouble with a regulatory body, or whether it's just keeping us out of trouble from things coming out in the press, bad publicity about toxic behavior, toxic culture. We see so many examples of it in the news across all different kinds of industry, where something comes out and 9 times out of 10, it links back to some behaviors, something that's happened and gone wrong within the culture of that particular organization. And that's what culture is. It's driven by how we do things on a day-to-day basis. So it's our systems, it's our processes, but fundamentally it's our behaviors in the day-to-day. And what's really interesting about that is often with our employee research, behavior is the thing that we least pick up on, and we spend the least amount of time researching and analyzing and talking about inside our businesses. So as a starting point, we like to look at, well, what can we do to try and tap into behaviors a little bit more? Our typical measurement and way of reporting survey data, so I'm sure everyone on the call will be familiar with this, seeing something like this after we've run a survey, it tends to be very far removed from behaviors. We tend to have a look at things like an engagement. We'll talk about an engagement score, which will be made up of how motivated our people are and how proud they are, and do they intend on staying here? Things that we want to get an idea of how our colleagues are thinking and feeling about. And we'll have a look at their overall engagement score, and we'll talk about how does that compare to an external benchmark? How does that compare to our internal benchmark? Maybe how do our different departments compare with one another? How does it compare to what we achieved last year? And then we'll have a look at all of the different scores on different questions we ask around different aspects of the day-to-day experience. The challenges with this largely lead to some of the problems, the challenges which you've just identified in that poll, which Dawney had up on the screen. The reason being is that benchmarking is often the main priority that leaders will bring to conversations around this type of employee listening survey. The reality is, if benchmarking is the first, second, or third priority for us as organizations, we're kind of losing the focus. We're kind of missing the purpose of why we should do employee listening in the first place. Benchmarking can always be useful to give you a bit of an idea of what other organizations are doing. But if we're always spending time looking to the left and to the right, we're not going to move forward as organizations. We hear organizations often talk about their unique mission, their unique values, and what makes them unique culturally as an organization. Yet we're making our employee listening more bland by forcing ourselves to ask the questions that thousands of other companies are asking, so that we can tap into that bit benchmarking. So the pursuit of benchmarking can come to the detriment of really good quality, tailored, unique employee listening that we're doing inside of our organizations. The other challenge with it is that is that the way we ask questions, how people feel, whether people have confidence in something, what they believe, around all of these different themes that we can see on the right-hand side, whether it's well-being, whether it's questions about growth and development, we get an idea of how colleagues feel about it. And ultimately, that leads to the kind of conversations around actions that ultimately become very difficult for us to sustain that momentum and actually drive tangible change. Because if we see some low questions around recognition, reward and recognition, what's the action that we can take away to just suddenly improve that? And the way in which we ask questions typically lead us down the route of thinking about a policy change or a systems change or a process change. And rarely is it about a behavioral change. Well-being is a classic example where we've seen organizations try to improve well-being from a policy perspective, or introducing duvet days or fresh fruit Friday or whatever it might be. But true well-being comes from the behaviors that we see and observe and experience in our day-to-day work and lives that ultimately lead to us feeling energized and psychologically well. And so what we're saying is that not necessarily have to completely change your entire surveying approach, but how do we get a bit deeper than this? How do we start to supplement this and evolve our research so that we can tap in to some more of the behavioral focused stuff that is going to give us more actionable insight? And I'm going to give you a bit of an idea of what that could look like, and would love to hear from you in the chat as to how this resonates, whether you think this might be useful inside your organizations. So the first example, very simple one. Instead of asking people, to rate on a 1 to 5 scale all of these different aspects of work like we typically do, we like to ask colleagues, what are the behaviors that you see on a day-to-day most regularly in your workplace? Because that's what can start to give us a real idea of their lived culture. We can start to get a sense of what is it that people really see, what is their true experience. And immediately, when you plant in a question like this, the data that you get on the other side helps you start to bring your values to life a little bit more. Every organization has values on the wall, but what does the data tell us about how much they are actually seen, felt, lived, breathed on a day-to-day basis? Where are the gaps? What are the things that we're doing really well? But what I'm going to show you here is just how it can also start to bring a bit more meaning to engagement. So straight away, one example we've got is just from asking that one question, what you can start to get from an insight perspective is an actual understanding of what a difference or a variance in engagement level means. Now, what I mean by that is typically with things like heat maps, you might be accustomed to having a look at engagement scores and seeing, well, this team's got a higher engagement score than that team, and this team's 10 percentage points below this other team. But what does that actually really mean? How significant is a 5 or 10 point difference in engagement? What does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis? This type of data brings a lot more meaning, and it's a lot easier for people to connect with, because what I would like to point out here is that these teams that we've got across the top, these are 5 teams inside an organization that are all feeling really positive. They see positivity around them. They feel valued, they see good teamwork, they feel like in their place that's lighthearted and quite fun. And then if you cast your eye towards the bottom of the page here, these are 5 other teams that are, yes, less engaged, but actually, when you look at their experience of the workplace, it's almost like you're looking at a completely different organization. Now, bear in mind that these 10 teams do the same job. And it really starts to give you that power of understanding of just how influential the leadership, the management within those teams must be, that even though the job is the same, the experience that those individuals are having is completely different. And when we talk about engagement scores, and I'd love to hear if you've seen and felt this as practitioners, when you talk about engagement scores inside organizations, it can often feel quite transactional. And the reason for that is that engagement is a term that we've coined for the purpose of doing these types of research and surveys. Nobody talks about being engaged or disengaged on a day-to-day basis within their teams. And all of us that are on this call today as humans, how often do we go home after work, or downstairs after work if you're working at home, or upstairs? How often do we talk to our loved ones and our friends and peers about how engaged or disengaged we are. It's not a language that we use. So naturally, when we're using it in the workplace environment, managers and leaders don't connect with it that much emotionally because it's not something that they're talking about. When you're looking at data like this and you're actually talking about culture and lived experience and just how different it is for people and what experience they are having and how far, particularly for those bottom 5 teams, how far removed that is from what we would expect as being a good experience that we should be given to our people at work, it really starts to connect a little bit more, and managers and leaders really start to understand what this engagement score really truly means. I've got another example as well from a diversity and inclusion perspective, where rather than just having the traditional male versus female split, and you could do this by age group, by length of service, by ethnicity, whatever it is, and however it is you're cutting your data. But using this example with gender, again, we'll often use heat maps and see, well, actually, males might be more positive about the manager and more positive about reward and recognition, but ever so slightly less positive about teamwork, for example. But again, what is the significance of that few percentage point difference? And what do we really do as organizations with that insight? Now, if you put the behavioral lens on that and you actually see, again, just what the reality is of the day-to-day experience, just what those differences are in terms of how women feel and what they experience in the workplace compared to their male counterparts, it's a far more powerful and compelling story that actually females are far more likely to say that it's secretive inside their place of work. They feel like it's far more inefficient, less supportive, less caring, far less respectful than their male counterparts. It's immediately far easier for us to emotionally connect and put ourselves in the shoes of a female colleague and actually start to almost feel what it must be like to be a female colleague that's experiencing those things compared to a male colleague. Far easier and more powerful to emotionally resonate when we get the data in that way than on the left-hand side, which is the more traditional route. So there's one example with one question. Second example I want to give you is what we like to do here at WorkBuzz around leadership and managers. Now, historically, we'll use scale-based questions to ask questions about managers, regional leaders, executive leaders, whatever it might be. And what we'll always see in the data, particularly over recent times, is that senior leadership will get lower scores than line managers. And again, we'll get this kind of response of, well, what can we do with this data? I'd also like you to consider how difficult it can be for colleagues to rate their managers on a 1 to 5 scale around different aspects, different questions that they get asked about. Similarly with leadership. What we like to do is remove all of that and actually just keep really constructive behavioral focused questions in there around what are leaders doing well? What are managers doing well? So we have some questions where we actually get people to think about senior leaders and think about whether there are certain behaviors or things that the leadership already do really well, or whether there's things that they would like to see their leaders do more of. And then the manager questions, which is a particular favorite of mine, is rather than any scale-based questions, just asking people, what does your manager do a great job of? And then what would you love to see your manager do more of in the future? You're immediately removing any of that emotional difficulty on either side. So you're taking away the challenge for people to feel like they've got to rate their manager, and their manager's then going to see scores of what they've said as a collective team. But also for the manager, it's far more constructive to be able to give this feedback, because you can say to managers, well, this is what your team love about you. This is what your team would love to see you do more of. There's no negative in there. Where it gets really powerful is what we're then able to do from analysis perspective to get more actionable insight for organizations. So with that leadership question that I had there on the left-hand side, things that leaders already do well, things that we need leaders to do more of. Here's an example of what we've seen from a few organizations recently that are all grappling with this classic challenge of confidence in leadership being low. We've seen that as an industry trend, particularly over the last 5 years. Confidence in leadership is lower than it has been at any point over the last 10 to 15 years. people are really looking to leadership teams to kind of give them that clarity and confidence in the future. But again, for a leadership team, how hard can it be to sit and have a presentation of insights back to you that tells you that confidence in senior leadership is low? It's lower than it was last year. It's lower than it was the year before. What as a senior leadership team are we meant to do about that? Well, this insight is really useful for senior leaders, because actually what we're able to show them is that it's not that your colleagues are saying you're bad people, that you're bad leaders, that they don't think you're the right leaders to take the business forward in the future. What they're essentially saying is two-way communication really needs to improve. We need you to give us more clarity. We need to feel heard. We need to feel like we've got an opportunity to voice our concerns in a safe way and feel like they're really listened to. Essentially, we want to get the sense that you empathize and understand what it's like to do our role. And we want to get confidence from you that the things that you're talking about in terms of strategy and future direction are kind of considering us and our needs, and that you're able to give us some kind of clarity. That's it. This data is able to really kind of shout that message loud and clear to leadership teams. All of the things that people are saying we need more from our leaders around this are all to do with two-way communication. 4 of the top 5 things that came out as we need to see more of this were around better two-way communication. We can then take that even further for leaders and actually show them that this is what is driving that confidence gap. So, and I've seen leaders almost have that sigh of relief a little bit, that it's kind of, all right, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Because as senior leaders, particularly if you're in a business of thousands of people, you can't go and have a chat one-to-one with absolutely every individual in the team. It can be hard to kind of really connect. But it's about giving them that clarity that if they can find ways to do this and use their management teams as well to help them do this, it's going to have a profound impact on confidence and leadership. So let me tell you what this visual is saying. We basically have a look at, and this is how you can make the most of your traditional survey questions. I have confidence, or I believe senior leaders are taking us in the right direction. There's lots of different variants of that question, but we essentially take the average positivity of colleagues around the confidence in senior leadership question, and we have a look at what that level of confidence is based on whether they believe leaders are demonstrating this behavior well already, or the populations that believe leaders need to demonstrate the behavior a lot more. So using this behavior example, being available to colleagues when needed, all of the employees that believe leaders currently demonstrate this behavior well and therefore are available to colleagues when needed, their confidence in leadership is 88% positive on average, compared to less than 1 in 5 colleagues who don't see and don't believe that leaders are demonstrating that behavior well enough. Less than 1 in 5 are confident in their senior leadership team. So it's about how you make connections between the behavioral data and some of those more standard questions to help provide a greater depth of understanding and to help make those insights feel a little bit more actionable. Because for a leadership team, in this particular client example, it's all about communication channel and how to get that right. How do we use the right channels? How do we make it two-way? What are the right opportunities that we can test out, we can try over the coming months, and then measure and see whether it's having the right impact. So that's a couple of examples there immediately of how you could completely refresh or add some newer insight into your surveys just through a couple of additional questions that you will be adding into your survey. I am going to take you through a slightly more detailed client case study to bring some of this to life even more, weave in some of those manager examples that I mentioned. But I did want to take a pause there for Dawny, in case you had any questions, or if we've got another question for the audience at this point.
No, I don't know about you guys, but I could just hang off Rise every word, because I think what this does is just simplify it. If we look at the words that are used in there in terms of giving you better visibility of what that lived culture is, it's so powerful. And just that ability to go and speak to people afterwards and be really specific about what they'd need to do more of, or what people really love that they're doing. I think it just changes it up quite a lot. How does this, you have touched on this a little bit, but how does this influence the ability to take action? from your experience?
Yeah, I think, and we'll come on to it, particularly with the case study where we go more into the management piece. I wanted to focus a little bit on the confidence and leadership piece there, because for what we're seeing across all industries is that confidence and leadership is usually the number one theme coming out of surveys. And so, of course, you present into a lot of leadership teams that are thinking, it's tough. It's a tough time to be a leader. They're leading in times where there's no blueprint for how to get this right. So, and they're humans as well, right? So a lot of senior leaders have their own challenges around well-being, burnout, and so sometimes the impact is that it's the way you've just hit the nail on the head. It's the way the message lands, and it's the way in which it enables them to reflect in a more constructive way about what they can do with this data. And I come back to the fact that a lot of this, what I've showed, is it's not rocket science, but that's the beauty of it. It's more simple, and as I mentioned, it's easier to connect with. We're not talking about an engagement score that is up 1 or 2 from last year. And what does that really mean? Is that acceptable? It just gets straight into the actual everyday experience. And then it's easier to have those conversations of it. Is this what we want people to be experiencing on a day-to-day basis in terms of behaviors? And so from an actionable perspective, particularly as some of the stuff we'll go on to look at with managers, it just feels easier and clearer for them as if I go and change and role model this one thing 20% better than I have done over the last year, you're telling me that confidence and leadership is going to shoot up, or our engagement score is going to shoot up. Absolutely.
And hopefully that really feeds into one of those challenges that came up at the beginning on the poll, which is around building trust. Because I think it brings, I always say, I never know whether this is the right word or not, but it brings the human into it, doesn't it? It takes it away from these questions that are sometimes difficult to understand, especially when you're going further down in the hierarchy as well, where, sometimes I've seen questions asked where you're asking people to say how they feel they can contribute towards the strategic priorities of the organization, where they might not even really know what they are on a day-to-day basis. So again, it's like asking questions that are really easy for people to understand. So it builds trust, because you know that the reason you're asking them is to be able to do something about it, is to be able to take action, and that builds trust over and over again.
Absolutely. Totally agree. So
a question. Oh, go on, carry on.
No, sorry, if there's a question.
Well, I was going to ask a question. I'm going to do a poll in a minute just to see of those who are listening who does behavior-based questions at the moment. I'll ask that poll in a second. But just a pondering question from my perspective. Which team-level behavior, if consistently improved, would create the biggest lift in performance or belonging in your organizations? And this is to the listeners. It's just to get you thinking about what is the thing that is front of mind for you, based on everything that you know about the organizations that you work in at the moment. If you want to chuck it in the chat, that would be amazing, while I just do the intricacies of launching the next poll. Right, poll time. So, are you currently using any first line leaders? Without a doubt. Judith, thank you. Anyone else?
First line leaders is such an interesting one. I mean, they're again hugely challenging role. I think a big challenge with those managers that we see time and time again from research is actually an alignment piece with some of the senior leadership stuff. So we talk about communication. Often we see time and time again gaps where first line managers, even middle managers, don't have that confidence in the messaging, whether that's during times of change or just generally around strategy. And if you've got a gap between how your middle managers are thinking about and their confidence levels in that, how can we possibly expect that they're communicating with confidence and clarity within their teams and consistency? And so I think there's a challenge for line managers in terms of their capabilities of managing their team, but also how we're properly supporting them and enabling them and giving them what they need to do what is a really challenging job.
Yeah, and Judith's just added that they have big teams and are constantly having to prioritize operational issues ahead of people.
Yeah, exactly that, and it's going to lead into the case study. We placed Judith in this. I'm so glad you did this. So this is exactly so this case study we're going to look at is within retail as well, where that problem is absolutely there. Like trying to get managers to even spend 5 minutes thinking about something that isn't their operational stuff and store target and all of these things is really difficult. But it comes back to that simplification and connecting them with it. So if you really connect them with how all of this stuff is their day to day, it is their operational stuff, or ways in which they can do things that are going to enhance the operational stuff without it feeling like a whole other thing that they have to think about. That is absolutely the key. And trying to talk to them about engagement scores immediately, it's a switch off because it's not something that they really emotionally connect with straight away. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
And I guess, do you, a question back to everyone on the call is, do you involve frontline managers in designing your survey questions? This is not to say that you go out to all frontline leaders, but do they have a voice, I guess, when it comes to developing that strategy? Because again, that's a way of building trust, right? Because if they feel you're invested in them and that there is a question in there that's really going to help them have a powerful conversation with their team, then it changes things up. So does anyone include their frontline managers in any way, shape or form in the way that they develop their questions at the moment? I'm asking you lots of questions and I haven't even done my poll yet.
Even employee rep forums, anything you have like that, the more you can make people feel like employee listening has been shaped by everybody in the organization and not just by HR and a select few of the stakeholders. The more confidence you can have that people are going to really connect with it, and they're going to feel like it's really relevant to them. And I think that's definitely one kind of criticism of surveys, isn't it? That it often feels like it's the questions are all about what the business wants to know from their colleagues and less about what colleagues really want to provide feedback around. It's getting that balance is key.
Yeah, we've even had feedback in the order of the questions, haven't we? Sometimes where it's like, ask me about me first, and then I'll be more willing to answer questions about the organisation. So it's almost answer that what's in it for me first, and then move on to everything else. So there's some real thinking that comes into creating even the questions. It's the bit that gets me most excited sometimes because it feels like such a missed opportunity. But let's just ask a quick poll. Are you currently using any behaviour-based questions in your employee surveys?
Love that tip on ordering, Dawn. don't make your first question, I feel motivated to do more than is required of me, or that traditional motivation question wording.
Yeah.
Immediate switch off for people. Yeah.
So I'm going to end the poll and share the results, and we're going to have a big 100% no at the moment. So a real opportunity there, which leads us really nicely into the case study, right? So let's bring that to life for everyone and just see how this plays out in practice.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'd like to go back to almost the very beginning of employee research in terms of where you should start, and that's really what is the almost the cornerstone of really great employee research. Because when you really sit down and think about, well, what is it that we really need to get insight around? What is it that really matters to us as an organization? If you do that thinking correctly, it will influence how you run employee research. So you won't just ask questions because everyone else asks them, or you feel you should because other organizations are asking them. You won't just randomly pick questions that sound nice. You'll actually be asking questions that are really going to give you insight you need to drive the organization forward. And we do that with all of our customers as the first point. So we do a real hands-on context assessment, deep discovery, kind of really think about what it is as an organization we're trying to achieve, get an idea of where we are now, what some of the kind of the core pillars, the kind of the things that we need to really get right for this to ultimately be successful, what they are, identifying those, and from there coming up with a real good plan of how we're going to shape employee research. So with this particular organization, we did all of that thinking. They've been running a a 15 to 25 question-ish, somewhere in that range, employee engagement survey with a provider for a number of years, having a look at the engagement score, doing all of that. Has it gone up, gone down? Where are our highest scoring stores? Where are our lowest scoring stores? But actually, when doing this discovery and really getting to spend some time with their C-suite as well, everyone at that executive team was talking about wanting to create a business where everybody felt like they belonged. So it was really inclusion that they were talking about. They wanted to almost create this internal experience that matched what they were trying to do from an external brand perspective. They were really wanting to be a brand, it's a retail brand that were truly inclusive for their customer. And they really wanted to be the standard setters for what that was like internally as well. Combined with that, the fact that we were in a really challenging environment, particularly for retail and hospitality, and that real focus was on our store network and how do we make sure that we really truly understand what's driving high performance in our stores. And ultimately within that environment, retail and hospitality, how well a location, a shop, a store runs is largely down to the operational managers, the store leaders within those teams. So for us, what we decided to do from that was to do a very focused survey, behavioral survey, where any of the questions that weren't behaviors, and I don't expect you to read all of this, were around two things. Do people feel psychologically safe, and do they believe in the organization's kind of commitment to ED&I? And from a line manager perspective, so specific questions just to their store managers. Do you feel like you've had the support and training that you need for the people management part of their role? It kind of links to what Judith was talking about. Everything else that we had in there was either a behavioral question or something that was helping us to just understand that kind of day-to-day experience, what it must be like to work in the stores in a little bit more detail. So probably a shorter question than the majority of people on the call would expect to see for a kind of an annual survey. But as I mentioned, this was all about answering the questions that organization needed to get the insight to. And I want to show you about some really great quality insights that the organization was able to get just from that short question set. So the first thing, asking colleagues, have you had a meaningful conversation with your line manager in the past 4 weeks? So if it's an organization, we really want to drive inclusion, we really want to feel, can we create this culture where people look back on it as being the happiest kind of time of their career in 20, 30 years, which is what I continue to hear their executive team talking about. Surely we need our line managers to be and having regular conversations with people. So we'll explore this. 72% of colleagues have or had a meaningful conversation with their line manager in the past 4 weeks, but just over 1 in 4 of them hadn't. Now, in isolation, you would look at that and think, okay, is that to be expected? What do we do? Should we maybe communicate out and ask managers to kind of give them a nudge, make sure they do have those conversations? But what we really wanted to do is highlight the impact of all of this. And this is about how you connect data points. So what we found is that those people who had a conversation with their line manager in the last 4 weeks, 84% of the words that they used to describe the culture, using that example question that I showed at the beginning, 84% of the words that they select to describe the culture were positive. That drops down to 55% for people who hadn't had a conversation with their manager. So immediately, we can show just with a couple of simple data points that the frequency of conversations that line managers are having is having a profound impact on people's day-to-day experience and perceptions of working for the brand. Those people who had a conversation with their manager, all of the top 20 words that they use to describe the behaviors that they see around them in the workplace, all positive. Fantastic to see, the kind of things you would love to see in that type of environment. Customer focused, they're innovative, they're collaborative, they care, they're friendly, but also some really good scores in there around, a third of people saying it's diverse, it's inclusive. People who hadn't had a conversation with their manager, what we started to see is that the words they use to describe the culture, that's where you start to see the negative coming in. So where people are having a negative experience or are witnessing negative behaviors, it always seems to be coming from those colleagues who aren't having that connection with that regular connection with their manager. And even the positive words dilute. So it's not as strong in terms of how customer focused they are. It's not as strong in terms of how inclusive they are. And you start to see some of those words coming in that actually, when you look at it, you wouldn't want anybody to have that experience at work where they feel it's controlling or they feel there's favoritism, it's demoralizing, it's uninspiring. And also, really interestingly, within a retail culture, everyone works long hours within retail typically, but it's actually those people who don't have that kind of stronger connection that it becomes more of a negative thing for them. And so that was the first bit of really interesting insight we were able to get. What we were then able to do is start to see that the stores that were the most positive in terms of not only the diversity, equity, and inclusion questions, but also the stores where the managers were more positive about feeling that they've had the support and training that they needed. Those two populations were far more likely to be having the line manager to be having conversations with their team. So basically, the stores where managers are really confident about the support and training they're getting, 80% of colleagues are having regular conversations with their line manager. That drops down to only half in the stores where managers aren't as positive, aren't as confident that they've had the support and training they need. We see a similar picture with diversity and equity and inclusion. So again, we started to then see that there's actually a link here between conversations and just perceptions of inclusion, but particularly that manager support piece, manager confidence is clearly something that's going to impact their propensity to have these conversations with their teams. We saw that, and this is what I mean about bringing more meaning beyond data, we were able to see that actually where people were positive around both of those DEI questions about the believe in the brand's commitment, as well as feeling psychologically safe, they're having a great experience. All of the words they're using to describe the culture are positive. Where you start to see either neutral colleagues, but particularly colleagues who responded negatively to both those D&I questions, instead of just having those two data points in isolation, when you have this, you actually start to be able to feel what it must be like to be those colleagues. So it's not, oh, they've scored less positively than these other colleagues have around those D&I, EEI questions. When you read those words, you can actually start to almost feel and emotionally connect with what it must be like to work in that type of environment. Who would want to work and experience that on a day-to-day basis, or feel like any one of our colleagues or people that we're managing within our team is having those experiences? So that's what I mentioned about that extra emotional connection that it gives you. Now, Dawn, to your bit around how does this become more actionable for managers? What we started to look at is, if you remember the question, is what does your manager do a great job of? And then we have a multiple choice set of kind of standard behaviors, and we follow that question with the same standard behavior list, but we ask, what would you love to see your manager do more of in the future? Where that insight gets really super interesting is when you start to segment it by high versus low, whatever it is you're interested in, high engagement versus low engagement, high well-being versus low well-being. With this particular organization, as I mentioned, the focus was on inclusion. So let me talk you through how this works. What we did and what we do is we take all of the stores that have the highest scores around feelings of inclusion, and we compare them with the lowest scoring stores around perceptions of inclusion. And we have a look at what those colleagues are saying their manager role models really well and what they would love to see their line manager do more of. The blue bars represent the percentage of colleagues which say their manager already does this really well. So this behavior, taking the time to get to know me as a person. In high scoring stores around inclusion, 81% of colleagues say that their manager already does a great job of that. Only 11% say, I want my manager to do more of that, or I need my manager to do more of that. When you take the lower scoring stores, it drops down to 35%. So basically 1 in 3 colleagues would say, my manager takes time to get to know me as a person. And 1 in every 4 colleagues is saying, I need my manager to do more of that. This becomes really powerful insight when you start to get a sense of, well, what are the core behaviors that help to explain the difference in experience? For this particular organization, there were 6 behaviors. And so what was really powerful is they also showed a similar trend. And so what we were able to do with this particular organization is say that these are almost your 6 golden behaviors. If you want to create high performing stores, if you want to create consistent role models across your stores, these are the 6 behaviors that you should relentlessly focus on coaching, developing, and just generally supporting that growth of your store managers around these behaviors. And they're not rocket science. These behaviors are all things that you would look at it and say, well, yeah, managers should be doing that. The beauty of this is in how easy it is to connect them with the impact, just how important this role modeling is, because we've been able to show them how important these behaviors are in terms of achieving the organizational kind of goal and mission around inclusion. We've been able to show them how important the frequency of conversations is in terms of people having a positive experience of work. The only bit that's really missing from here is showing the link of, well, why does this ultimately matter in terms of helping us drive the performance of the organization? And so we filled that bit of the puzzle in as well. And I'm going to show you how. Before doing that, the final bit that we did with the manager piece, which I thought was really interesting, is taking all of those behaviors. We wanted to have a look at the stores that had the high scores around support and training and compare those with the stores that were low. So basically, this is the manager's confidence themselves that they've had the support and training they need. What's really fascinating is 4 of those 6 behaviors that I had on the previous page came through as presenting the biggest gap. And what I mean by that is where managers were confident in the support and training that they'd had to do the people management side of their role, colleagues were far more likely to say, my manager does that behavior really well. In the stores where managers didn't have that confidence, they were far less likely to. So again, we're connecting the dots. But what's beautiful for an organization is they then have extra meaning for a heat map around the scores-based questions, because what they knew is that where we have the lower scoring scores around manager confidence, we know that we need to prioritize them in terms of the first port of call for more coaching, more hands-on development. So instead of giving everybody the same program or the same set of support, we can actually be far more targeted in which behaviors we work on with which selection of store leaders. So just really, really powerful insights we were able to give them. We also connected all of this data back to their historical organizational data that they'd had. And we were able to take engagement score data, connect it with the behavioral data, and actually show that the same behaviors, the same manager behaviors and the managers having frequent conversations with their teams were all having a similar impact on engagement levels as well. So it wasn't just inclusion, it was also driving engagement scores. And the final bit that I want to mention is just that connecting the so what. So all of this up until now is okay, as a manager, I get it. I need to do these things. I need to work on role modeling these more. That's going to make a difference to my people feeling more positive, more engaged, having a better experience of work. That's great. Where you then amplify that story is when you start to layer in, well, what is it actually going to mean for the financial performance of your store, those operational targets that you might have? And so what we were able to do is actually map and link their not just their inclusion data, but even more significantly, their historic engagement data, and actually show them that where they had higher levels of engagement, the average weekly stock loss within that store network was significantly less, I think it's fair to say, than in lower engaged stores. So all of the stores that had the higher levels of engagement, the average weekly stock loss around £1,000 a week, that doubles, nearly triples to £2,760 for those organizations that have much lower levels of engagement. So immediately you start to have that full story. This is the impact that you have as a manager on your people. This is how you can role model behaviors to have a more positive impact on that. And oh, by the way, this is what it's also going to mean for your ability to hit your figures. I wanted to leave it there to avoid data overload, but we did also do similar connections with things like gross sales, conversion percentages from sales, and we saw a consistent and similar message throughout. So when we were able to give all of that data together, we're not only creating a compelling story for why engagement, inclusion, well-being, for example, matters, but we're able to actually give a really clear behavioral blueprint for the managers that all you need to do is go away and reflect on, how can I do more of this as a manager on the day-to-day? How do I role model this more? And then for our HR, our people functions, the reflection is what more can we do to support managers to be able to role model those behaviors? Immediately more actionable, immediately more human, immediately easier for everyone to connect with. The very final piece I wanted to leave you with was kind of plugging something that we're doing in the future, which is along a similar theme of what Dorney and I have been talking about around emotional kind of connection to data and storytelling. And one of the things that we've started doing is using our private gated AI that we've been developing to actually take whole data sets, no matter how large it is, and actually create a first-person narrative to summarize in 300 words what the average colleague would say if they were speaking at a town hall, for example, on behalf of everyone. What would they say to describe their experience of working for your organization based on all of the survey insights that we've got? And what we love about this and what our customers are loving about this is it's another thing which really plays on that power of storytelling piece. We're humans. We've grown up hearing stories, listening to stories, telling stories, loving stories. And then when we go to engagement data, we're constantly throwing numbers at people. So what we're doing is working more with this type of survey feedback, insight, way of presenting insight back that comms teams can work with and share with everybody, that helps to really emotionally connect everyone to what the survey's actually spoken about. And I've had CEOs that have only read this as part of their survey follow-up pack and just immediately thought, I get it. I totally get what it is our colleagues are feeling and what they need to do. So I wanted to kind of share that because it's a big focus for us as we move forward to continue kind of really pushing on the storytelling. And from our experience, it's something that adds even further value to what you're doing from a surveying perspective because it makes it real. So that's it for myself. Thank you so much for listening. Dawn and I would love to know, what's your story? What's your story when it comes to engagement and culture research? What's resonated? What are you perhaps going to take away and try and do with inside your organization? What are the things that you're already kind of grappling with? Please do let us know, and we can spend the next 5 minutes answering any questions. Back to you, Dawn.
Well, as Rai said, we'd love to hear from you just to finish off in terms of anything that you've found interesting, powerful, any takeaways from today. I think for us, as Rai said, it is about the storytelling. It's about bringing the human into the way that we listen, and it's about layering up the way that you think about your employee surveys, and hopefully that's come across today. I think the most powerful thing for me with the behavior-based questions is the biggest differences when you look at it through that lens. It's not small differences we're talking about here. It really enables you to focus on the things that are going to have the biggest impact in terms of that lived experience, that culture. And I think for us, it's about that blend, that mix. We can absolutely ask the traditional questions. We can absolutely measure engagement, but it's when you bring and join the dots between those data points, those behaviors, that lived experience, I think it just changes things up significantly. So any feedback from anyone, anything anyone wants to share in terms of their favorite question they ask in their survey and why, what's resonating in your world right now? If not, then we will take you. You are very welcome. It was very interesting. Thank you. I'll give that to Rai because he did most of the talking. But the next webinar in the series is happening on the 16th of July, and we have a client bringing this all to life. And this is Nick Searing, who's head of internal comms at Butlins. Rai is presenting their results tomorrow, actually, and they have really embraced this idea of listening differently and bringing in everything that we've talked about from the first webinar where we talked about AI and bringing that in from a technology perspective to simplify things for managers, all the way through to changing up the questions that you ask in the survey. So Nick will be sharing his early learnings from that and really bringing to life how they've got this to land. Butlins, like many of the organisations that we work with, have a majority deskless workforce, so harder to reach, really busy jobs, and probably would relate to Judith's points around prioritising operational issues and delivering amazing guest experience and making people smile, which is their mission there as well. So it'd be interesting to learn from Nick with his internal comms hat on in terms of how he's got that to land, how this has all come together, how he's got the executive team on board and how they're building a strategy. Definitely not just ticking that survey box. So if you're not registered already, come and join us for that. The link's on our website, but we will be following up with the slides from the day today and the recording. If you've got any questions, find myself and Rye on LinkedIn. We're very active on there, or send us an email. But thank you for joining us on this lovely Wednesday afternoon from cloudy Chepstow and from Cheddar in Somerset and from wherever else everyone else is dialing in as well. Oh, hang on, we've just got one more question. We talk a lot about the link between culture and behaviours, but I think we are missing a trick in that we do not ask any behavioural questions in our survey. Let's keep talking. You know where we are. And Rye's always happy to bring this to life. And the case study that we used today, you know, their focus was inclusion. This can link to any of your key priorities. One of the things we often say at WorkBuzz is we start with the end in mind. What is your organisation trying to solve for? We never assume that we know all the answers. That's where that deep discovery and context setting comes in. So hopefully our passion for it has come across today. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Thank you so much.